Loading. Welcome to Access the Animus.
Hello everyone and welcome to a new video here on Access the Animus. Today we're going to bring you the second part of our analysis of the Assassin's Creed crossover, fully dedicated to the story taking place in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, so once again, spoiler alert if you haven't played it already. In the video, we're going to analyze the encounter between Eivor and Kassandra, including the lore details connected to the Hidden Ones, their hunt for the Apple of Eden hidden within a vault located in the Isle of Skye, the appearance of a hologram when it was activated, and the unexpected modern-day documents that can be found while playing the quest. We're also going to have a look at some lighter topics like the wedding scene at the end of the quest, an Isu Map that features an X that marks the spot, some markings that don't really seem to be Isu Language, some non-canonical weapons, and way more. So if you enjoyed the video, please consider liking it, subscribing to our channel, and turning the notifications on so you won't miss any of our future updates. And with that out of the way, let's jump into our analysis of the Valhalla portion of the Assassin's Creed crossover. And of course, we start at the beginning of the crossover quest, where the justification for Eivor to travel to the Isle of Skye is a seer friend of Valka called Edith, who told Eivor that in the island many people were having issues with their sleep and their dreams. Valka here is a little too precise with her visions, I have to be honest, as she does foresee that Randvi is behind the events happening in the Isle of Skye, which of course is a joke by the devs on the fans' theories about Randvi actually being Kassandra during Valhalla's marketing campaign, but she also mentions another vision where she saw that Eivor would meet quote-unquote Randvi within a place of death, that they would fight and eventually part their ways forever. Like I said, this is a little too precise for the visions of a normal seer, and while she has the DNA of a descendant of the Isu Freya, this still shouldn't work unless it's held by a piece of Eden. And very much like what happened in Siege of Paris, Eivor decided to go on a mission somewhere else for fear that what was happening, again somewhere else and so very far from her clan, could affect indeed Ravensthorpe. Eventually, Eivor got to the Isle of Skye thanks to Edith, whom she would never meet or even talk to again till pretty much the end of the quest, and then traveled to Kiltaraglen, the town which saw the biggest complaints about sleep and dreams, and both on the way to the town and in the town itself, Eivor heard citizens mentioning different nightmares that they had with one element in common, an eagle flying over the island. Of course that's a reference to Kassandra, the eagle bearer, as all these nightmares have been caused by the Apple of Eden itself, maybe in a way to turn the citizens against Kassandra and keep her away from the Cave of Gold where it was located. Before getting to Kassandra, Eivor stumbled upon a bride-to-be who was actually Edith's relative, and apparently she had had a dream of her ex-lover crashing her wedding and starting a fight, which is actually what's going to happen at the end of the quest, showing once again that the apples can indeed show glimpses of the future. Talking to the bride, who also believed Kassandra to be the cause of all of this, would indeed lead Eivor to the Eagle Bearer and to this amazing fighting scene / ballet, where at some point Eivor and Kassandra got to fight with their signature weapons, respectively the dual axes and the hero's sword, and where eventually Eivor showed her hidden blade. This surprised Cass, who, in a shocking plot twist, eventually did show to have a hidden blade of her own, which, as we mentioned in our analysis of the Odyssey part of the crossover, has the same bracer that she was wearing in her trip to Egypt, and this element in common pushed the two women to talk. Kassandra stated that even if she had a hidden blade, she was not a member of the Hidden Ones, but she admired their work, showing that not only she knew of them and their objectives, and even had friends amidst their ranks, using the present tense, meaning that she had Hidden Ones friends during the Viking Age, but also that she possibly had collaborated with them as their objectives frequently aligned, pretty much as Eivor did during the Viking era. So being both aligned and friends with the Hidden Ones acted as a point in common that allowed the two warriors to cooperate. Kassandra explained that she had gotten to the Isle of Skye because on the island there was supposed to be an artifact, which was causing all the nightmares, and of course, thanks to the Odyssey portion of the crossover, we know that Kassandra is here as part of Aletheia's task of destroying or depowering all the pieces of Eden, but more specifically, we can also see how the Isle of Skye was indeed one of the locations that Aletheia showed Kassandra back in Corfu. Sort of. Actually, the location shown in the Odyssey portion of the crossover doesn't really seem to point to the Isle of Skye, but to a more inland area of Scotland, like say, Loch Ness, which was also the case in the Piece of Eden map shown in Origins and the one shown in AC1, while you could stretch it and say that the map in AC2 did seem to point to the Isle of Skye. Anyway, Kassandra said that she wasn't able to find the artifact because of the fog, and when Eivor told that she would be able to lift the fog and its curse, Kassandra didn't answer and looked sideways as if she was actually talking to Aletheia. And it's pretty much confirmed too, because she says that, quote unquote, something tells me we should work together, which is pretty much the same as in the Odyssey part of the crossover. She says, something tells me my journey is not over yet, showing that Kassandra masquerades Aletheia's messages as, quote unquote, something tells me. So once again, Cass was directed by Aletheia in order to chase her objectives, which this time required her to work with Eivor, and they were indeed able to lift the curse and the fog from the crypt of the church, while their egos kept clashing as they both tried to pick the other apart through some funny or ironic comments. As they exited the crypt though, the two warriors were attacked by many villagers controlled by the artifact, who seemed to be oriented at talking to and attacking Kassandra specifically. Interestingly enough, scanning them with eagle vision shows a tiny little glow on their body, showing that they are controlled by the artifact, and a similar glow can be seen by scanning Kassandra too. That is meant to represent that Kassandra is actually still holding the Staff of Eden, which is keeping her alive, even if the staff itself isn't seen, and that too is justified. In fact, Odyssey's ending proves that the user doesn't have to manually hold the staff at all times to stay alive, because the staff itself can shapeshift. In Odyssey's ending, we can see for a brief moment that Kassandra is keeping it in the shape of an Apple of Eden before turning it into the staff itself, so that also means it can likely transform into something else as long as it's in contact with Kassandra's skin supposedly, so that's why we can't see it in the crossover quests. Anyway, after dispatching the villagers and after being pressed on by Eivor, Kassandra mentioned intentionally vaguely that the artifact was an object of great power left on the island by old gods. And even if you get to choose all the potential answers here, you won't find, once again, any spark of knowledge in Eivor, who for the billionth time will not recognize what the artifact might be about or the potential effects it might have, even if she's probably the main character that has interacted with the biggest number of pieces of Eden and First Civilization technology. Nonetheless, the optional dialogues do provide some interesting information. For example, Kassandra recognizes that she and Eivor aren't affected by the artifact, and thus that they are of similar quote-unquote strength, which is her way to say that they both possess enough Isu DNA to not be affected by the pieces of Eden. In another dialogue, our sweet summer child Eivor asks why the artifact has been causing issues now, and Kassandra makes a joke by saying that Loki got bored, which does seem to be just a joke, but can also be interpreted as Kassandra knowing about Loki because of her dialogues with Aletheia, or maybe even just as Kassandra knowing about Eivor being Odin's reincarnation, which might be why she's making a Loki joke. The two of them met again later and found their next destination, which was a stone formation that seemed to be connected to the artifact. On their way there, Kassandra did hint that her hunt for the artifact started from the vacations she had in Corfu, and that eventually her plan was to take the artifact away from the island for safekeeping in a place that only she would know about, which kind of means that Kassandra might have stored all the artifacts that she could find in this specific place, and in the modern day somebody could find most of them in there. Who knows, maybe this is going to be picked up in the future. Instead, what mattered to Eivor was just that this artifact might have brought her power and glory, which I deeply dislike because at this point it's becoming repetitive, monotonous, and honestly in my opinion the look for power isn't the most attractive of features for a main character. Eventually the two arrived at the Fairy Glen area, which is a real location in the Isle of Skye, and they did find the rock formation that turned into a standing stone minigame similar to the ones from Valhalla's main game. Even this one is actually preceded by a document by Saint Brendan of Clonfert, where he unknowingly mentioned a few pieces of information about the artifact. In fact, he did draw the map of the top part of the island and wrote that he felt a commanding spirit pulsing around the island. That's the artifact, of course, but he couldn't find where its source was located. This rock formation, though, like many of the other standing stones, brought back some Isu-related memories to Brendan. In this case, it's several sentences in the Isu language that make up a new Isu poem, which, if you're interested about all its meanings, we actually analyzed all of them in our dedicated video that you can see on screen right now. Checking the stones with eagle vision led to none other than an X marks the spot kind of map, which, if you think that these are Isu-related rock formations with signs that can only be seen with eagle vision, a map with an X that marks the spot isn't really an element that screams ancient advanced civilization, but maybe that's just me. Nonetheless, Kassandra couldn't see any marking on the rocks, which is very consistent with Odyssey as she never possessed eagle vision, and when she recognized that Eivor had it instead, she did ask her about her genealogy, but to no avail. Eventually, Eivor showed Kassandra the X on the map, and the presence of 5 more locations shown on the map with 5 triangles, which are a reference to the 5 shards, but we're going to talk about them later in the video. So the two of them set out to reach their new X-marked destination, and eventually they found a cavern called Cave of Gold and a small Isu temple, or more likely the antechamber before it. Apparently, Kassandra had already seen other temples like this, as she knew that in order to remove a protective illusion, Eivor had to go at the center of the antechamber, and of course behind the illusions the two of them found the pedestal and a gate to the remaining chambers of the Isu temple, but before they could have a look at them, the apple sent more possessed villagers to stop them from progressing any further. The interesting element here is that one of the cursed civilians actually speaks in Greek and talks directly to Kassandra, stating that the godly blood that she has is not meant to walk in these specific lands, which again seems to be pointing at the artifact knowing who Kassandra is and very likely what her mission is about, and thus is trying every possible trick to stop her from accomplishing it. During the fight, another enemy, still speaking in Greek, states that the apple is not meant for Kassandra and actually belongs to another god. This is an element in the quest that actually seems to be pointing towards another entity using the apple to create the illusions and to stop Kassandra from acquiring the various artifacts, rather than the artifact itself doing all of this. But then again, a few moments later, Kassandra also says that it's her presence that might have activated the artifact, so yeah, that's still a bit confusing unless I'm missing something here. Once they disposed of the enemies, Kassandra confirmed that in order to open the main door, Eivor needed to find 5 shards, the 5 triangles that they saw earlier in the map. But once again, Eivor said she wasn't trusting Kassandra because she hadn't told her the full story about her presence being the main reason for the artifact's reactions, and that's where Eivor decided to go and look for the shards on her own to avoid the apple messing around more with them. And again, we have another scene where Eivor could prove that she knew what she was dealing with because she had already interacted with multiple pieces of First Civilization technology, but instead we get innocent Eivor here. Innocent and ignorant, using Juno's words. And greedy for weapons and power, it seems, so way to go for our main character. Eivor was thus confronted by Kassandra, who told her she's impossible. Remember these exact words as they lead to a secret dialogue / easter egg that we have already discussed on our channel, and thus set herself on a quest to find the 5 shards across the Isle of Skye, which, and I know lots of you have asked about this, they shouldn't be the same shards that make up the pyramid artifact in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Granted, they look similar in shape and they have that little vertical line in the center, so they are the same type of Isu tech, but they have very different purposes. While the ones in Odyssey allowed to extract visions and calculations about the future, these ones act as mere keys to power and open a door. During her hunt, at least in my playthrough, Eivor stumbled upon 2 weapons that are connected to Kassandra. The first one is the Hero's Sword, which was Kassandra's signature weapon in the Odyssey campaign, and as we saw earlier, was actually still in Cass's possession during her fight with Eivor, while the second one is the Spear of Leonidas, and it's in its full Spear of Eden version owned by Leonidas no less. Now, let's address this immediately. These are no more than Easter egg weapons without any story implication, and Eivor never got hold of these weapons. First of all, like I mentioned earlier, the hero's sword was being wielded by Kassandra in this exact historical time, but of course the most visible reason lies in the spear itself, which is actually shown in its full and original form as it was wielded by Leonidas of Sparta in Odyssey, and Odyssey itself did show how the spear got broken during the Battle of the Thermopylae, which is why it ended up that way in Kassandra's hands, and it stayed that way until it was found by Layla, or maybe not. In fact, and spoiler alert here, in the Assassin's Creed Brotherhood of Venice board game, which is actually supposed to be part of the canon, the spear, as in the actual broken spear, resurfaces in Italy around 1509, where a female assassin called Alessandra d'Avanzago has to retrieve it because otherwise it could give quote-unquote the secrets of the Brotherhood away, which doesn't really make sense, with some hints at her being related to or knowing about Kassandra since she was young, and the assassins of that time vowing to hide the spear so the Templars couldn't find it. Yeah, I know, a lot to process there, which kind of messes up the spear's timeline a bit too, as it would have been much better if the spear had been buried with Herodotus' book after his death and had stayed there until Layla found it. Anyway, back to the spear in the Valhalla part of the crossover. Some of you have written to us to mention that there are symbols written on one side of the spear, some nice eagle vision there, congratulations, but these writings are also coming from the original model of the spear from Odyssey. In fact, by playing the starting sequence of the game, you can actually stop it with photo mode and find the same symbols written over the spear. So once again, these symbols shouldn't be tied to the Isu language, as the language itself was created during Valhalla's development, so who knows what their meaning is, if there even was one back when Odyssey was developed and released. Anyway, as we mentioned earlier, Eivor stumbled upon Kassandra seemingly talking to herself next to the Cave of Gold. This is actually the secret dialogue with Aletheia that we already documented in one of our previous videos, and it doesn't change the story that much, but it does add two elements of connection to some of the previous dialogues. For starters, Kassandra begins her monologue by telling Aletheia that Eivor is impossible to talk to and work with, which are pretty much the same words that Cass told her earlier in the cave. In addition to that, the information itself that Kassandra is still talking to Aletheia does explain the moment that we saw earlier where Kassandra seemingly changed her mind after a few seconds of silence that likely corresponded to Aletheia advising Cass to cooperate with Eivor. After all, in the dialogue, Kassandra even states openly that Aletheia wants her to work with her. Nonetheless, eventually Eivor found all the shards, one of which was in possession of the mother of the bride she had previously met, and placed them on the pedestal, which indeed opened up the door and gave access to the innermost chambers hidden within the rocks. She later got to another hole where she was attacked by even more mind-controlled villagers, but this time she was saved by Kassandra. This of course led to another fight, after which Eivor once again complained about Kassandra attracting more enemies, but she answered by saying that she would be needed when they'd find the artifact, which actually proved to be true. So Eivor solved the light beam puzzle, and then the two of them entered the final corridor, which was filled with illusions, and more specifically illusions fully aimed at Kassandra and at stopping or slowing her down, like some Spartan and Athenian shields, several Greek spears, Greek statues and columns, and more. But there are two elements that hit Kassandra right where it hurt the most. The first was a Cult of Cosmos mask, which prompted Kassandra to reminisce all the cultists that she killed, but also to have even more memories of her home in Greece, even if she knew that these were all illusions. The second one, which actually broke her, was the toy eagle that bound her and Phoebe, the orphan kid that she befriended in Odyssey's main game. With this final blow, the apple won her battle with Kassandra, who fell to her knees and didn't want to move from there, but Eivor could still move on and finally saw the artifact and tried to reach it. When she picked it up, the apple turned out to be belonging to the type that the Atlantis artifacts also belong to, that is the type of apples that turn humans into monsters as part of the Olympus project. And in case you need a refresher on that, you can check our recent recap of Kassandra's story, whose link you can find on screen right now. So this time too, the artifact is trying to control its human host while emitting a recorded message from the Isu era that is, honor our blood long after we're gone, and while Kassandra comes to the rescue to try and control the artifact as she did with Barnabas, the hologram of the monster that Eivor might be turned into appears in the back, but it's blurred, I dare say intentionally blurred, making it real hard to understand what the hologram is about or to even see some hints about it, and very quickly it dissipates, because Kassandra takes control of the apple and eventually gets to keep it. Not that it matters too much for this specific story, but I would have liked to know more about that hologram. Anyway, that was the climax of the narrative arc, and after the apple was secured, Kassandra and Eivor recognized that they worked well together, with Kassandra stating that she had pretty much always worked on her own, because that was the path that she was meant to walk, a reference to both the tasks of Keeper of the Staff and the power of the artifacts that Aletheia set for her, but Eivor invited her to one last drink together, and this opened up to one of the best scenes of this part of the crossover. But before that, you can actually go back to the corridor that led to the apple's chamber and see it in its proper Isu architecture style, without the illusions, and you can even reach the actual artifact chamber where you can see 6 pillars that were seemingly powering the apple, and that actually hold a slot inside of them that is so very similar to the slots from the Excalibur's ancient tablet. But it seems like this is just asset reuse and nothing more, as there doesn't seem to be any tablet to find in the Isle of Skye. So to finish up the quest, Kassandra and Eivor did meet for a final drink and a very nice and human scene, with Kassandra not being used anymore to walk in crowded places and Eivor trying to help her. So the two of them went for a drinking contest before they sat down to drink more mead as Kassandra remembered Marcos, the man who raised her in Kefalonia. There was also the Malacca moment, which for me was just there, but I'm not surprised about it as a lot of fans like the various Malacca jokes. In that moment, the two warriors found out that they were actually crashing a wedding, where Eivor once again saw the bride that she had met in the village, her mother whom she had met while searching for the shards, and even the bride's ex, whom she had dreamt about under the influence of the apple. The wedding scene ends with the fighting between Cass and Eivor, which matches the tone of the scene itself pretty well and that I very much enjoyed. And then we have the final parting with Kassandra thanking Eivor for helping her have some more social and human contacts, considering how she's been alone all this time, and Eivor finally seeing Kassandra lifting her hood up and disappearing in the darkness. But is it over? Of course not. As many of you might know already, this free quest actually adds some tiny additional modern day content in the shape of a picture and a text note, and the very interesting element here is that the note changes whether you are playing as Basim or Layla. So what you need to do is exit the Animus and look for Rebecca's desk, where you'll find a picture of Kassandra using her hidden blade, and if you're playing as Basim, the note will show how he actually knew about the quote-unquote Great Eagle Bearer. I wonder how he came to know about her, and he states that Aletheia's memory, and I believe he is meaning Aletheia's conscience within the staff, was well accompanied by Kassandra, once again proving he is caring about his loved ones and how they have been treated through time. If you're playing as Layla instead, as we can see in this picture by Ellie White, the note is completely different and interesting and weird at the same time. It's not signed and it's not written by Layla, but it's about Animus hosts and it's on Rebecca's desk, so we can surmise it's penned by her, and in there she is wondering if Layla, while experiencing the memories of an Animus host, which is here used as a sort of opposite term to Animus subject and is indicated Eivor, she is wondering if while experiencing Eivor's memories, Layla noticed something odd in the Animus when Kassandra, who was another Animus host for Layla in the past, appeared in front of Eivor, which is an interesting question. How would the bleeding effect caused by Layla's time spent with Kassandra and identifying as her affect Layla's experience and simulation once she sees her as an outside character and not herself? Could that create some conflict within her and the simulation? The other question by Rebecca is also pretty interesting, even if it's slightly confusing the way it's put here. Could the staff and thus Aletheia know that Layla was experiencing Eivor's memories while she met Kassandra? Could Aletheia and Kassandra have had different interactions, knowing that the Heir of Memories was seeing them as they were interacting with Eivor? And most importantly, even if this is more of a question by many members of the community rather than by Rebecca, if the events in the Isle of Skye happened before Basim died, couldn't Aletheia just tell Kassandra to hand the staff to him during the Viking Age? Of course, this last one is more of a provocatory question, considering how two different teams, Montreal and Quebec, in two different games, Valhalla and Odyssey, made two so very different portrayals of Aletheia with different objectives and agendas, that is, using Kassandra and Layla to get to Basim in Valhalla, compared to tasking Kassandra with helping humanity and Layla herself in Odyssey. But still, we're talking about the same franchise here, so it's a question that still stands, especially considering how much the crossover is trying to tie the two games together. And that was it for our full analysis of the crossover stories event in Valhalla and Odyssey. What do you guys think? Do you agree with our analysis of the Valhalla portion of the crossover, or do you have any other theories or questions? And what about the crossover in general? Did you enjoy it as a concept, and would you like to see more crossovers in the future? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in our next video.